Well, James, welcome back. Are you ready to make some video games?
Always.
Because we're at that point now, right? We're about to actually start working. We're gonna open up a program, start modeling, write some story, throw in some code.
Sure. Yeah.
So we are making a video game. We have gone through the last few episodes here where we've talked about prototyping, we've talked about different game ideas that would work well for the two of us, we've talked a little bit about our own strengths and weaknesses, and now we're at the point where we've decided what game we want to make, so it's time to start the next step, which is a prototype plan. And James, what you've put together is so incredibly cool. When you first said, yeah, we're gonna make a prototype plan, so I'm like, all right, cool, easy episode. We'll just have probably two, maybe three bullet point lists of this is what needs to go into the game, this is what needs to be done. Here's our here's our bullet list of the models. Let's do this. But there's so much more that went into this, and so much more helpful information than I would have expected. So I'll give
Yeah.
you a moment here to talk in a moment, but we do have a document for this online that will be linked in the podcast description. So whether you're an audio listener or listening at home on YouTube, you can see it now while we're going through it, or you can look at it after. But it's got a breakdown of everything we're going through in this episode. So if you're also making a video game and you want to put together your own development plan at this same stage that we're at, then yeah, you can just follow this, and I guarantee you'll make millions of dollars. Right, James?
Maybe. That's a dream, right? That's a dream.
Now, we didn't talk about this, James, but I just thought about this now. You've worked with a lot of different indie teams. Is there anything about the development plan phase that we're going into that you see a lot of common misconceptions from different developers or indie teams that have maybe are at this stage or have even skipped it?
I mean, a lot, right? Like, I think most common is there's a phase when you're new and you're learning indie development and you're following along. And we see this all over the place with people who are very vocal, people who are not vocal, where they say you don't need a plan, you don't need, any kind of direction. You just gotta like run at it and get it done and get it out there and make your first game and like everything's fine. And like, yes, in essence, they're not wrong. If you're just a solo developer and you've never made a Mario style game before, like you should probably go do that. But does that mean that that is a successful game that's going to get you out the door and you're going to build like Shovel Knight? You're not like it's you're not at that stage, right? And I think there's a serious gap in understanding that when you're first starting out, it's okay not to follow common conventions. It's okay not to have a plan. It's okay to just be ad hoc with it. But at some point, we all want this to be our main job. We all want this to become a studio. We all want this to become something that we're getting paid to do. Like, many indies want like a Patreon, or they want like a successful YouTube and people like following. And, that doesn't come from you just figuring it out and just like tinkering, right? There's a way to do it.
I wonder if that misconception comes from the people that just followed that route and got lucky and the stars aligned with the product they were making and the time that they released it, and just they ended up having a decent enough quality that it took off. And so from their perspective, that's just what you got to do. You just actually got to go out and make it. I'll tell you, those are the stories I love watching YouTube videos on, where it's like, yeah, I just followed my dreams and the stars aligned and my game was beautiful and everyone loved it and played it.
Yeah, but you also listen to those same stories and they're like, yeah, I worked on my game for like 9 years. Like Stardew Valley was in development for 4.5 years, right? Supposedly. But if you think about all the time that was probably spent thinking about the game and everything else, like as we discussed, that all contributes to the project. It was probably longer, but 4.5 years, excuse me, for the scope of work. And we don't know how much of that was contractor based. We don't know how much of that was revision. We don't know how much of that was clever design. We don't know how much of that was how much work was done on previous games before that. But people don't hear that, right? People don't think about that. They don't think about the pre-setup and all the boring stuff. As we've discussed, they think about, oh, 4.5 years. I could totally dedicate 4.5 years to make a Stardew Valley. And it's like, that's not what it is. It's not just 4.5 years of dedicated focus. It's is more to it than that. And I think
Well, because before we started all this, I was in my mind. I think what was it? By now, we would have been mostly done the prototype, and then getting ready to decide if we actually wanted to make the full game or not. That's where, but that's where I thought we would be by now.
well, it takes time if you want to do it right, right? And I think that, especially for us, we want to do that. We want to show that process. Like everything that we're doing now, you could and should be doing for any project you're starting of any scale. And that helps make sure that like what you're doing is like, is it worth that 4.5 years? Like, is it 4.5 years? Is that feasible? Like, do we have it planned out? I mean, I'm trying not to ramble, but like, yeah, that's the biggest misconception is I think that people see the underdog story and they think, hey, that's not too bad. I could be an underdog. And what they don't think about is like the journey of the underdog of how long it took them to get to the position to be able to be the underdog, right? That's a
And
long time.
thankfully, through this episode today, we've gone through the process of taking the information that James, the veteran expert, has, and now anybody here can also take this. It's honestly, it's like a cheat code. Not like a cheat code that's gonna make you $1 million. Sorry, I lied earlier, but it's a cheat code to get started and have a better understanding and a better premise of where to go and how to begin. So at least that's how I feel about it. So thank you, James.
Oh, you're welcome.
So there's a few things we're going to be going through today with our development plan, where we'll talk brief through the development plan. We have a brief information on what our game is so far, some of the stuff that we've talked about, and correct me if I'm wrong, James, but it feels like a lot of that is important to put into this document in a basic sense, just so that again we have it all written out and as a basic understanding, so that everyone involved in the project has like at least at this point, a central document that we can all see and make sure we all agree upon for it. Where we'll be talking, where we have some of like the core mechanics. We'll go through story arc, our characters, environmental design principles, and I mean a bunch of other information after that. But then the big bread and butter that I'm really excited about for all of this is actually getting down into the prototype development plan aspect of it, where we've got pre-production and planning, asset creation, implementation and development as testing and iteration, and then time estimates. And at least for me personally, going into this, what I feel is the most important for me is the pre-production and planning part of it, for the first part of the prototype development plan. And at least that's just because I feel like that's the groundworks for how we're going to be approaching and actually eventually getting to do the work of creating the models and the code and all the parts that I felt was most of game development.
Yeah. No, it'll be good. A lot of this is about laying down the groundwork, right? And listening to you there, it brought up a good thing to point out is when you're starting out and I don't mean starting out in development, I mean starting out on a project. Often what'll happen is, and this happens even to me and everybody else, is like years later, like it's very common. But you start tinkering with an idea and then you get through all the stuff that you were most interested in or most excited to explore. And then it just doesn't really go anywhere, right? Everybody of all skill levels I know has gone through that process where they're just like, I came up with this cool mechanic. I don't know what to do with it. There's no direction for what to do next. It's just like I really wanted to figure out how to make a lasso and throw it over something and catch something and like pull on it. And then it's all prototype art, of course, like Manny and Unreal, and like a cylinder lifts up from like a line renderer. But it works and it's interesting. But then it doesn't go anywhere. And so what we've done with this, like breaking down what our concept is and then planning out all these smaller pieces, is to create a roadmap for our future selves. So then when we get in the engine and we get to that point where we've done the initial work and we're like, hey, it works. And we're like, well, what do we do next? Well, we can go back to our plan and be like, oh yeah, that's right. I have like these assets to make. I have this dialogue to record that gives me something to do. And having those small iterative tasks are much easier when you kind of know what like a category they fit into versus saying, oh, I have to write a story. Like this is going to be so complicated. Like you don't, you just have to write like a line of dialogue and then the next line of dialogue. And it's a way to keep momentum.
So then, Mr. James, where do we start?
Well, first, I think I should probably share the screen so we can like take a look at what's
Yeah, so if
going on here.
anybody's interested in, like, we're going to be going through this, and we'll have the document up on the video version of the episode as well, which the video version's up on Spotify and YouTube, so you can find it both there. But also, no, you don't have to listen, or you don't have to view the video version. It's an optional thing. Everything, we'll still be talking about everything. You can still hear James's beautiful voice going over all of it. So you
Okay.
laugh, James, but it's a very nice sounding voice.
Oh, you're so sweet. Got a toothache. Uh, okay, so like the game premise for those who maybe are not familiar, but just for the sake of being the broken record, right, is that the game centers around a dynamic narrative driven by a narrator and a child character, where the child is in making interruptions and dramatically alters the game world and the narrator's story, which is what our players are going through.
And so for something like this, and what I noticed reading through our the part of the document where we're going over what we've decided for the game so far, is this is all very basic and simple. Yet we have spent a lot of time working on the brainstorming and writing out a lot of information for it, but that's not so that we can regurgitate all of that information into this document. This document is just for the game so far. It's the important basic information that's needed for it. We're also not throwing away the information that we've written up before. That they have their own, that's all in their own documents for their own specific reasons, but this is just the simple and the basics, so that it's kind of like you can I don't know, read it, move on, but still understand what's important.
Yeah, this is pretty well the executive summary of the game, right? So it's not a high concept. This is a little bit more defined than a high concept, and something that you would use to just guide how you wanted to approach your plan. So there's no particular structure here. There, for those who can see the screen, it's core mechanics, story arc, character, environment design principles, audio design principles, technical considerations, and future development, which is something I like to include just so if a team member is like, hey, we didn't talk about, this thing, we can address it and say, no, that's not a prototype thing. That's later on when we're doing like minimal viable product, or we're getting ready
That
for a
sounds like a really smart
slice.
idea, because if you're working in a team and there's certain mechanics that people would be really invested, or certain aspects they're very tied to emotionally, then it can still be there in a way that doesn't harm the rest of the document, but also makes those people a little bit more comfortable. And
It's a very, very easy way, right, on like project management side, to make sure everybody feels heard, right? Everybody's ideas and everything is still accounted for. We're just not there. We need a foundation before we can move into that specific thing. But yeah, it's very small. Is it needed? Not necessarily, but it's still nice to have there anyways, because to keep it fresh in your mind and all the other reasons we've already covered. But diving into core mechanics here. So we have a narrator child dynamic. The central interaction is between the player, the narrator, and the child. The child's influence on the narrator is a key gameplay element. Uh, Player triggered narration events. Players will interact with the environment or make choices that trigger specific narration points. Real time world transformation is visual changes to the game world occur in real time as a result of the child's interruptions. And dialogue changes. The narrator's dialogue progresses with specific points for child interruptions, which is basically our branching stories.
for these core mechanics, we've got four of them in the documents, and we don't have anything like movement or other mechanics similar to that. Is it just because these are the core mechanics that are unique and special to the game that we're doing now, and that's the important mechanics that need to be recorded in this document?
Yeah, right. Like if this was a technical document, or not even a technical document, if you were submitting this to like a publisher, they don't care about your movement. They like, especially in our case, right, where this is going to be a first person perspective, so we don't have to worry about models. What really are we changing about how a first person character moves about a 3D world? Like we're not changing anything. It's like very standard. In fact, it's like like boiler template, like we opened up the box and this is how it's going to stay forevermore. So there's no reason to address it. Like it's very standard. So for this, where we're just trying to get a nice executive summary for the team, it's okay to skip that because it's in our high concept and our initial ideas, but we're not going to be developing that for a prototype, so we don't have to include it here.
Okay, so if we were doing a first person shooter, then the the core mechanics we might see in that could be if there's a vehicle that someone needs to drive, or if there's some sort of branching dialogue option, like that would be there. But anything to do with like collecting upgrades, running around, getting more ammo, because that's all fairly generic and accepted within that, it's not considered a. It wouldn't be written down and marked in as a core mechanic in this document.
Yes, because the focus, right, that the focus I want to bring here is that we're doing prototype, right? Vertical slice or minimal viable product. Of course, we have to address the upgrade systems and everything else. But because we're doing a prototype, that's really not necessary, right? If your game, if you build out a prototype and you don't have an upgrade system in and it's not fun because there's no upgrade system. It's because the act of playing your game is just not fun, right?
I guess what I find a little challenging sometimes talking about this kind of stuff is if like, a lot of this stuff would still be very situational. Like if we were building a prototype for a game where the upgrade system was like deeply tied into the actual progression of the game, then that would be a different case scenario where the upgrades would then like if you had to when your character leveled up if you had to choose between a key or the ability to swim and then that decided how you would progress through the level, then something like that would then become something important enough to put in the core mechanics here because we're strictly and specifically testing that in the prototype.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right. So for us, the things that we care about mechanics wise, and when I say care about, I mean things that we want to explore. Because first of all, we don't even know if this idea is fun. Facts, right? We haven't played it. We haven't
Well,
tested
James,
it.
it's us we're talking about. It's going to be fun.
Hey man, I've made some duds. I've made some duds. But point is, the mechanics that we want to include at this stage are the stuff that's a little bit bespoke, things that are unique, something that's going to allow us to test the premise of the game, right? And again, with our case, it's all about the child narrator dynamic, how those events are going to happen, how they're going to play out in a feedback system for the player. That's our real time world transformations, right? Like how does it impact the story? And then the dialogue chain. How do we go from moment to moment narration while allowing the player to still play the game actively? Because we're not making a linear path where you select the dialogue choice, right? So we have to test that, and that's why these are included as the core mechanics for this prototype.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we've talked a lot about mechanics and core mechanics and the differences between them before, so I just wanted to make sure that I understood the reasoning behind it here. So,
No worries. I'm glad you bring it up. Uh, and so I've added story arc here too, and that's the next category. Those listening. Uh, and I have placeholder here in the document just because in brackets, because we're not trying to develop the whole story right now, right? Instead, I want to focus on kind of like the hero's journey. It is like the beginning, which is going to be we're introducing the narrator and the initial setting and establish the narrator's intended story. Like, what is the narrator trying to read to this child? Our next bullet point here is rising action. It's introducing the child's presence and their first interruptions leading to minor world changes. The next is climax, a significant child interruption that completely reshapes a major part of the world or narrative and forces the narrator to adapt drastically. After that, it's falling action, is the consequences of the climax unfold with the narrator and child navigating the new reality. That's very like, not specific, but that's on purpose. I just want to bring attention to this is the flow that we kind of want to follow for this prototype because that's going to set up every single level, right?
no,
Next
I think it's really
is,
awesome. If
yeah,
because when we first looked at story arc before, my thought would have been, all right, let's. This is the where we write out the half a paragraph synopsis of the actual story, but it's just the basic of what we've talked about before.
yeah, we're just anchoring the idea, right? Something to keep in mind where we don't necessarily have to develop it. It's just this is how the flow should go. And we're ending here on resolution, which is the narrative concludes, potentially with an understanding between the narrator and the child, or a new unexpected ending. Now, I do want to address that with the narrative games. I often see this as an issue where there is no real plot or story development in terms of flow, in terms of enjoyment as a listener or somebody experiencing the story. So much work is often put into the characters and the setting, and this is what this looks like, and this is how that looks like, and this is the interaction that happens here, and like all the parts of a story except for like the actual story, right? And I've seen it a lot, and I've seen it
I'm
in a lot
feeling called out
of
here, James.
productions. Well, you wouldn't be the only one. But yeah, I see it a lot, and I see it a lot of juniors. I've seen director level people make these kinds of mistakes, where they're like, oh, we'll get to that later, right? We need to like figure out this like room and the story of this room, and it's like, oh, no, no, we need to figure out where this room fits in the story, and then you can go have fun. Like once we've figured out the purpose as to like where, what, why, like what happens after that, yeah, go nuts. Like go to the writer's room and go crazy. But if we don't have this arc of how the story is progressing, how can you determine what's going to happen there, right? How can we determine how it's going to fit in a larger narrative? So
Do you
so
think
I
this has come up from the emphasis that we have gotten on characters lately in the industry? Because I remember growing up playing video games, like there were characters that I liked and I enjoyed, but mostly I remembered like the stories, and that was the emphasis of like the overall game. But now it feels like there's been a lot more of a push on the characters and the arc of the characters themselves. Because I remember a lot of that has more of an effect on me now than it did before. Maybe it's just growing older and I look at them differently, but I don't know.
I I'm not exactly sure why it's changing. I don't know if it's just because the experience in the industry is changing, like as writers, right? And like what writers who entered the industry like 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago versus new writers entering the industry, like their basic level of experience and exposure to writing and media as a whole has changed. Same with every other position as well. This isn't just for writers, but because it's changing, that has impacts on how we build things. And I
It'd
think
be
that
interesting to see how it parallels with the writing industry with like books and novels, if maybe they went through the same kind of thing. Once like books
maybe,
became easier and more accessible to write for people.
I think so. I mean, biographies and things like that weren't exactly mass produced the way they are now, right? Um, but now there's a boiler template on how to do it, and everybody just keeps releasing the same thing. And all the books about any kind of biography are basically all the same. Like nothing really stands out on its own anymore as a story about somebody. It's just read like a technical document. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if there was certainly some kind of overlap like that too. Um, but in terms of character, I think that somewhere along the lines, especially with larger studios and projects that require a certain level of return, right? The emphasis became about how do we create characters that people really identify with or are really invested in so that they'll come play the product. So I think what has unfortunately happened is because of that focus on that character, all the story and everything else gets forced into revolving around this. I want to call it an enigma because it's not actually a character. It's just a set of marketing and like design things and personalities that fit a generic enough template to have mass appeal. And then everything else that happens in the world has to play around that identity, right? And I think that's why, not just games, but movies, film, their books, everything. I think that's why they're not as good as they used to be because that's not really what makes a story enjoyable, right? Like I don't. It's not like going and ordering food. If I go to a restaurant, yeah, I don't really want to see the whole process. I don't want to go through the whole thing. I'm there to relax. The purpose is I sit down, pay my money, and then out comes this dish that looks good, smells great. I get to have great conversation with those I'm with, and the meal is done, right? That's my involvement in that process. But when I'm reading a story, like I want to get to know who this person is. I want to see them develop. I want to see that this is a person. This is a thing, right? Like when you think back about like Frodo, if you're into Lord of the Rings or like anything like that, like the characters, who they were when they started, and then who they were at the end, like changed, night and day for all characters. And that's because as they go through the journey of the story, they're going through a story that they themselves are stuck in. Like this is the setting, this is what's happening in the world, and this is how this character is trying to navigate it. Sure, they have their own personalities, but the world didn't bend to what that character believed, right? Like the world of Lord of the Rings, Sauron, etc. None of that was bent around the beliefs, ideals, or the intentions, etc. that made up Frodo at the beginning of the first Lord, the Fellowship of the Ring, right? Like none of that factored into how Frodo was. It was, here's Frodo. This is who he is. This is what defines him. This is what his life has been. This is his friends. This is his family. And here's all the shitty stuff. Excuse my language. Here's all the terrible stuff that's happening in the world. And he's thrown in the center of it. How's he going to survive? Right. That makes that story interesting. If the world bent around Frodo and what he's doing, well, now it just doesn't make sense. It's not as enjoyable because we're basically reading the book from, I would argue, is like a narcissistic point of view. It's like everything is bent around world views of one person. And it's like, well, that's not interesting because the story doesn't actually change anything. We're just spending an hour plus like in this same thing. Like no, this is doom scrolling on narrative level.
No, I understand where you're coming from, because I also see it from the character's perspective too, where, because if we, like, I've talked about it a couple times, my favorite game of is Life is Strange, and I fell in love with the characters because the characters were so well written, and eventually it led me to consuming books and comics and things outside of my realm that I usually would never have gotten to, but it was because of those characters that I ended up buying and spending more money on other things that just had the characters in it.
Yeah, but I want to specify here, well written characters, amazing for all the reasons you just pointed out. But often we love those characters not because of just like what they are in essence, but we love them for what they represent. We love them for the struggles they went through and how we identify that or what we appreciate about that story, right? We love the characters for the things that they did in those stories. Does that seem accurate? Right? Like we love that journey of that character. And when there is no journey, when there is no development, when there is no hard choices, when there are situations where it just doesn't make sense, you're just, I don't want to use the term pandering, but you're making the situation, the setting, the writing cater to what the character is on a very, very, very shallow level. It's just shallow. That's all it is. There's no other way to perceive it other than, oh yeah, I like that. But like it doesn't last. It doesn't mean anything. It's just like, yeah, I like metal. This person likes metal. I'm not now invested in buying merchandise for a character that's just like that. Right. Like Brutal Legend, right? I love the character. I love the story. Like it was a great, phenomenal game, phenomenal acting, all that kind of stuff. But like, I'm not invested in that game simply because it's metal and I like metal music. Like that didn't make me spend the time and the money on that franchise, right? I did it because of the story. Everything felt cohesive. Everything matched to the characters and the story that played out where, yeah, it was a good time. It was a good experience. So coming back to what we're doing, that's why I wanted to make sure that we have the story arc here. We want to make sure that there's very specific beats, a very specific flow for how this is going to work out in the prototype, because every level after this needs to play off that. It needs to replicate that. We can't just make a game about a little girl who is in love with gummy bears, and then every time we turn around, everything is gummy bears, gummy bears, gummy bears. Like that's not fun, and it's not interesting. We might as well just be making a kid's YouTube short on a really, really bad YouTube channel, right? Um, so, did you have any more questions on that before like
No.
I move on? Or, okay, cool. Um, so characters, the narrator. It's the primary voice of the story, attempting to guide a player through a predetermined narrative. Their personalities should be adaptable and exasperated by the child's interventions, right? And the child is mischievous, imaginative, unpredictable force that disrupts the narrative story. Their actions are the catalyst for world changes. So the reason I have this here is kind of as like a template or a guideline for how we want those characters to be voiced and acted. And it's also should be a guiding point as to how characters are impacting their world.
Is there a reason why we left out the player for the characters?
Well, the reason
Arguably,
I
there's not much with the player, but wasn't
well,
sure.
it's kind of it's a really good question actually. I didn't include it because the player is basically a how would you say this? Almost like a second perspective, not a true like second person perspective, but we're kind of seeing the eyes through the child is the idea, right? So the player is the child. It's just the player has no choice as to who the child is, right? So as the player is playing the game, they're basically going to get to know the character, who they are, who they're playing as. And as they make choices, we're going to be having child say dialogue that's like tied to those choices, whether that's they choose to go down path A, path B, they want to pick up a certain object. They're, depending on how the development of the prototype goes, the idea in my head is that we'll kind of figure out through this interaction who this character is. So it's like a
Oh, that makes sense then.
self-defining character. Yeah. But like in terms of the player themselves, I didn't feel the need to include them just because they don't really have any impact other than exploring the world and causing the story to fall apart, of course. But like narratively, this is just we're an imaginary character. We're the enigma in the child's mind who's like, oh, three little pigs, and this is like what's happening in my head. And like that's really what the character is. By character, I mean player, sorry. So one, that's really hard to write down on paper. But two, we also don't have to worry about that right now. So
Okay, cool.
yeah, and it's perfectly okay at the stage to make decisions like that. Like we're not going to address that because it doesn't align with what we're trying to explore right now in the prototype. Perfectly okay.
Okay,
What
so then
wouldn't
this
be
would be for
okay?
characters that are important and crucial. Like if I had some shopkeeper that I wouldn't interact with once or twice in the prototype for some reason, or just some random guy on the street that was just like, "Hey, do you have any apples?" So that I can go get him some apples. He wouldn't be a character that I put in this. This is like the main
Well, he would be.
interactive pieces. Oh, he would be.
Where he wouldn't be is if in level 4, right, chapter 4 of our story, there's a shopkeeper that is part of the story. He would not be included here because he's not a part of the prototype.
Okay, so this is all the characters that we may interact with
In the
in the
prototype,
prototype. Okay.
right?
But like
And
a random peasant that's just filler to put on the street is not a character that would go in this.
no, no, and we wouldn't even necessarily even have that in the prototype either, right? Because it doesn't have any impact on the story. It's not part of our core mechanics, and because it's not anything fundamental to the development, we're not including it. It
Okay.
doesn't.
At
It's
times it
not to
feels like I'm
say,
asking far more questions that need to be asked, but so much of the stuff also feels very situational, where it's like no, but also yes in this other scenario, and so I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So
no, it's great, right? Because we all have those moments. Even myself, I've been like knee deep writing something and like stopped and been like, this isn't important right now. And I cut cold turkey and I go back to what's important. I just go down a rabbit hole, right? Like it happens. It happens. That's why frequent breaks, getting up and like doing a walk around your house or something, or go do the dishes in the middle of the day helps refresh your mind and gets you like, it keeps you on track. But yeah, right now the focus when I wrote this up was just prototype. We're not talking story in terms of what's going to happen. We're not talking dialogue lines. We're not talking any of that stuff. It's just what are the core elements that get, let's say, vibe, right? We're going for a vibe with this prototype. Is it fun to explore this kind of prototype? If it is, and where it's enjoyable, right? And we ask a few people to test it, and they're like, "Yeah, that was interesting." Or, "Oh, yeah, I didn't realize it was a dynamic story," and then it made me play it again. And like that's kind of what we want to hear. That's a target, but we only need to build a bare minimum to hit that one spot. We definitely do not want a situation where somebody comes to test the game and it's like, "Oh, what about the shopkeeper? And like, can I buy items from him? He's a shop." Or like, "Why can't I sell him things? Or why can't I take stuff off his?" Because it
Mhm.
detracts from what we're trying to understand, which is this idea of the narrative play between in a dynamic setting. Like, is that interesting enough for people to want to play more?
That's a really cool perspective I never thought about with this. So part like we have talked before about part of the prototype is so that we can have so we can make sure and understand things work and is fun, but also so other people can test it. But if we're putting in these other little subtle things because we want to test it, but it's not actually important or relevant to what's going on, it could become a focal point that pulls someone's attention away from what it is that we actually want them to be there experiencing and testing. Oh, that's cool. Which I think just that perspective alone really helps decide and understand what should or shouldn't be put into this document and then into the prototype too.
Yeah, that in essence is where all teams should start. Like, and this is especially powerful for game jams, right? If you're ever wondering why teams are able to pump out something that's like nearly a finished game during a game jam, it's most likely they've had some sort of process or some way of approaching their idea like this. They've had somebody on their team who's like, "Nope, we're only going to target specifically the mechanics relevant to what we need to do and nothing else." Right. And then once those mechanics are in, they move on to the character, they move on a little bit to the art, and they just expand and they hit very simple, short targets that build up to the game as a whole. If you're ever playing a game jam where it just feels like a bunch of stuff and neat ideas, but none of it fits together, well, that's probably because they didn't have a step like this in their planning phase. They were just like, "I'm going to jump in right now and start hooking stuff up based off what we're talking about." And then,
Well,
like,
that's how
there's,
I always thought game jams were supposed to be.
well, yes
Let's
and
just
no.
throw it together and everybody add things and that's our game.
Yes and no, right? Like there's different kinds of game jams. None of it is wrong. And I want to stress this point again. There's no real wrong way to do game development, right? There's no wrong way to do anything. It's when you attach a goal to what you're trying to do that the process of doing it can be wrong. So what I mean by that is if you're trying to make a real product, there is a proven way to go about doing that. If you're just trying to make a game and tinker and play and have fun, there is no right way to do that. Right. So a game jam, if you're like, "No, I want to build a team and I want to go further than the game jam," you should probably put in some serious thought and planning and organization into it. If you're just showing up to be like, "I would just want to flex my skills and get my like art in a prototype project and like call it a day," or my audio work or whatever, just do that. It's fine. It doesn't matter. Right. The problem I find, and this is focusing on the game jam part, is all the people that I know of and I've spoken to, students and otherwise, who do a game jam and they're like, "Oh, I just don't have anything for my portfolio." And it's like, I can't show the work I did in my game jams because they're not fun games. They don't like work well. They don't look good. It's just like practice. Well, yeah, because it was never meant to be a good game, right? You never tried to make a good game. You just made a game. And like, that's the consequence of that, right? Is if your site was to make a game, then chances of making a good game are pretty slim. Anyways, pulling back to what we're doing, everything should be focused on prototype and exploring the things that are going to make our game different. The next category is environmental design principles. So in here, our bullet points are dynamic and transformable. Its environment should be designed with the capability to change significantly based on narrative shifts. That doesn't mean every part of the environment should. It's just that's the extreme that we're trying to highlight, right? Potentially the entire environment could shift. So we need to keep that in mind for how we're going to implement the environment. The next bullet point is visual storytelling. visual changes should reflect the child's imagination and the narrator's reactions. So we really do want how our dialogue is going to play out with voice acting to be visually represented in what happens in the world. Uh, and the last point here is interactive elements, objects, and areas within the environment that trigger narration and child interventions. Pretty important for us to figure out is that volume based? Is it, do we want to go up to an item and press E? Is it that we just look at an item? Like there's like we need to test those mechanics for this prototype.
No, I like that. It's nice and simple because it's the three big things that we want to do with this game to tell the story and for progression. And I think I'm sure there's other environmental design principles that if we were to break down into another document that we get added in there as well. But these are the three core ones.
Yeah, and environmental design, at least in like what I'm approaching here in this document, is we're not talking about like level design. We're not talking about artistic design. We're not talking about technical art
So nothing,
implementations
no
here.
images, pictures, or models.
No, we are purely trying to target like the essence of the design. Like, how does the environmental designs integrate with our idea? Which for us, it's got to be dynamic and transformable, whatever that means. But that's a critical pillar, right? A game pillar. It's visual storytelling. Like, yes, we're going to have audio dialogue, but we really want to be able to show this change in some format, right? Whatever it is. Like whether it's like there was a deep rumbling, get out of the castle burst, and the child's like, a piggy, and then like so we had this like dark looming castle, and all of a sudden the doors break open, and now it's a barn, and it's a big pig coming out all bouncy and fluty. You know what I mean? Like there has to be visual impact to hit. And the interactive elements are just how we are triggering all those things. So like those are the most, like if I dilute it down, those are the most impactful things that we have to be aware of in our environment design. And all those other things that I talked about for art direction, level design, all of that doesn't matter because those can be changed without affecting these initial design principles. But we can't do it in reverse order. We can't model a castle with the doors and everything else and then decide, oh, we're going to change how we're going to like change how this changes into a different thing later because it becomes hard. We mentally have invested time and energy into making this castle, getting it inside the game, testing the doors with animation, getting the triggers to set up, and now we want to change it. Like it's hard. Right. It's hard.
So if we were to do the environmental design principles for like an adventure narrative game like Uncharted, I'm assuming then we would have stuff in there, or at least for the prototype, would be like climbable objects. Obviously there'd be different terms for it, but whatever the button sequences are called, that would be mentioned in like the triggers for something like that would also be in the environmental design principles. Like that's the kind of stuff we would be testing for in the prototype. And that's okay.
So it would be like simple ways to think about that would be like traversal mechanics. We want to make sure that those are designed into the principles of design or your traversal mechanics, your like button interactions that, I don't know, play an animation, open doors, etc. All of those elements have to be part of it. The other part of it needs to be like, I know some of those levels are dynamic and shifting all the time. I don't remember which one, forgive me. But with the boat, like that whole level was dynamic. Like it changed every time you played the level. It would be different. Took a ton to like design how to even do that in the first place, let alone integrating everything else into there, like art and like key narrative moments and like where's the player supposed to go and how's that going to work and like do they have to pick up an object, and there's so much more you would have to think about that. But the base designed element needs to be, we got to figure out how to like manipulate this boat in 3D space that the player is going to like run around in. Like that's a pretty like core concept that's going to affect everything else, right?
So that would be in the environmental design principles as well then too.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to come up with a bunch of different genres to make sure that it's easy to understand, so that hopefully I've got a good understanding. for environmental design principles, what might that look like for a game like Guitar Hero? I'm assuming the prototype wouldn't be like the menus and like customizing, but it would just be like the prototype would just be one song that you play through.
So a great way to approach environmental design principles there is, and this is kind of a stretch, but you're going to have to think about in that sort of setting a bit more about the user experience stuff, right? Like how are we presenting the buttons to the player? What does that look like? Is it just like lines that drop from the top of the screen, like older style rhythm games, or like with Guitar Hero, it's an actual like guitar neck and they're like flying down the lines? How are we going to tell the player like what kind of interaction presses are also representative of like playing a guitar, whether or not we're holding, whether or not we're strumming, whether or not there's the little whammy thing on the side? Like a lot of that has overlaps with interaction design because we're presenting that in the game environment. So that's how to think about it, is like the core element there is that we need to visually represent how, like, what is coming up in the song for the players to interact with.
Okay, cool. That makes sense then.
Yeah, as for like what it looks like, it's not about the neck, it's not about the guitar, it's not about the band in the background, it's about the players in this space. How do they like design this space so that it works for the concept? That one's a tough one. That was good. uh,
Sorry.
No, no, I appreciate that. I like that, and that also overlaps with like UI, user interface. If you're making a clicker based game or a hide and seek based game or something like that, you still have to think about the stuff in the same manner. Like how are players going to interact with the space, and what does that look like mechanically? Is it just a window that pops up? That's fine. You could code that in and be like, yeah, it's a window with a scroll box. End of day, right? But you still have to think about it.
Okay, so then, one last one to bring up for it then. If I was doing a point and click puzzle game for the environmental design principles, I would have. I guess see that how would I do something with that one? Because my first thought would be there's the like I have the area I need people to be able to select objects, and then I also need to have a way for them to interact with it. But I guess that's not really environmental design principles. That's is it?
That's why I liked the Guitar Hero example, because that's a tough one. It overlaps in a like hide and seek puzzle style game. The environmental design is it's the presentation of the game, the presentation of the information, right? That's what I want to focus on. So your
Okay.
presentation of the world has to reflect what your design is. Now,
Okay.
this all the examples and the questions you're asking and stuff, I want people to understand that it's not those are the best ways to go about that thing. No, it's about the perspective of that game. And this is where indie development is really hard, because all your examples stem from well-known games. They stem from ideas that everybody is very familiar with, right? But you're approaching the question from those presentation of that game world. So what I mean by that is when you are thinking about like, oh, how would this work in that game? You also have to think about what was the prototype for that game, and the things that they did for their environment design had to support that prototype. So for a hide and seek game, if it is a 2D point and click, how is that information best going to be represented to the player? Well, we're going to want to probably have layers. There's going to have to probably be some form of showing off models, but we don't want them to stand out. Or maybe we do want them to stand out in a way. Like that's the kind of stuff you have to think about. If it's a 3D navigatable, like first person view hide and seek game, well, now the requirements around environmental design are totally different. Now we can open up objects. Now we can physically move around objects. Maybe it's someplace in the middle. Maybe we're creating a game that's more like like a Resident Evil style game where we find an object and we want to pick it up, and now we can manipulate the object in 3D like a Skyrim rotating, right? And we now it's about how do we create the principles for all art assets to have an interactive system where I can pick up and rotate this candlestick to see a sticky note on the bottom that gives me a clue for the next spot, right? So your environmental design principle is all about how do we create the mechanics? Like, what are the most important parts for this environment, this presentation of the game world to the player, but in the context of what our prototype is. And a lot of people struggle with that because they don't really think about prototypes the way we're talking about. They think about it in the context of like how you were, where it's like, oh, well, I'm making 3D adventure platform style game, so I'm going to think about the game in the context of Donkey Kong, which is bad because your game is not going to stand on its own. It's going to have elements of Donkey Kong in it, which isn't bad. If you're not trying to replicate Donkey Kong, that's not great, right? Like you're being influenced on a design level to create another Donkey Kong clone, and that shouldn't be the target, right? The target should be, what do I want to do differently? What do I like about Donkey Kong? And if it's a specific mechanic I'm looking for, how do I make that mechanic work in the context of my prototype? And what is necessary in the environment design, which again is not art, it's not visual effects, it's not those processes, it's the underlying systems that support those.
I've also noticed while we're talking about this that the what you had for the environmental design principles made sense to me really easily because of all of the brainstorming and prep work we did beforehand. And because of that, it felt like I understood it perfectly in that scenario. And so I kept grasping for these other games, trying to be like, okay, well, do I like how would I do it in these other games? And I wouldn't be able to give proper decent answers for those because we didn't go through the same kind of process that we did for the brainstorming and the planning of this one, which I also think was kind of neat to realize there too.
No, I'm glad. It makes me it makes me feel really good because yeah, that's why we do all this build up and planning that everybody thinks is so unnecessary. Because we're not only just trying to figure out what we want to do, we're also cutting the branches off the tree that we know we don't want. So it's a lot easier now to think about the context of a different game and say, well, yeah, that interaction, that system is really interesting, but I don't actually care about it, right?
Yeah, because we could have skipped all of this stuff and gone straight into making the game, but I've without the understanding of what we've done and now having it start to be put together in this document, I think the prototype, at least if I was in charge of it and I had been going, we would have had so many things in there that didn't need to be tested and didn't need to be done. Because as we're going through all of this, there's even things mentally I'm crossing on my list. I'm like, okay, yeah, no, that doesn't need to be in a prototype. I would have put this in, but oh no, I just learned now that doesn't need to be in there either.
Yeah, and again, prototypes are not meant to be flashy, right? They're meant to show the unique flavor in its most basic form. Because if you can take that prototype, send it off to a publisher or your auntie or your best friend, or take it to a convention and just be like, "Will you play my prototype?" and shove it in front of developers and gamers. If they're playing it and they're like, yeah, this is kind of fun, like it's interesting, I don't understand what's going on, but like, yeah, this is good, I like this, I like doing that. If you can get that reaction out of a bunch of cubes, blocked out spaces, you with terrible microphone audio, and like paper cutouts scanned and used as textures, like if you can get that reaction, that's good. That means that your prototype, the core concept behind what you were trying to do, is good. There is something there. And now is a perfect time. Like when you have that feedback, that's the time you move towards MVP. Now we start talking art direction. Now we start talking model production. Now we start talking about outsourcing, etc. Right? Well, outsourcing is bigger scale, but my point is we move into building the content to fit into the systems that we prototyped so that it has a unique flavor, a unique presentation. That's the stage where we go from having like the presentation of like an icon moving towards the player, like a guitar neck, to having a physical guitar model with a stage in the background, right? That's the difference. So we want to have
Something I
it
wish we
ugly.
could have done at the beginning of this when we first started talking about prototypes and to really understand what what a prototype wants and needs and is just to take a bunch of things that we're familiar with that we go through day to day, like what would a prototype for a grocery store look like, or like what would a prototype for driving a car look like, so that we could break down and remove all of the things that don't actually need to be there that feel like if I was to build a prototype for a grocery store before we had gone through all this stuff, I would have had a building you have to walk into. I would have had a whole bunch of aisles and items and then the store clerk but really the prototype is just picking an item off of a shelf, taking it to the till where it gets checked out, and then that's like, you don't need going from the car into the store. You don't need the doors to open up to go in. You just need the get an item, take it to the till, and like that's all you really need for a prototype or something like that. Or like with a car, the prototype, you don't need a door to go into it. The prototype for driving a car, it's like, how do you turn it on? How do you turn the steering wheel? How do you go forward? Like there's, I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying the stuff there, but I feel like if we'd gone through that kind of stuff at the beginning, I think understanding prototypes would have been a lot easier to grasp and understand in the very start.
Yeah, and you're not simplifying too much. The goal is to simplify too much. Like that's what we want, because if you can make the basic level of interaction fun, or more importantly, find what makes it fun, you're good, right? It's hard to find the fun when you've decorated it and you have the set and you have the cashier and you have the dialogue and you have the money and it's like it's really hard to figure out if it's fun and what is fun and what is not, especially when you test with gamers, right? Like your audience. It's one thing to give a prototype to me and be like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, yeah, I could generate a whole document for you about like what doesn't work according to what you tell me you want to work. That's one thing. The problem that a lot of indies have is they keep thinking that I can't take my prototype to like play my game on Reddit or like put it out there into the world because like they're gonna rip me apart and that's bad and that's terrible, etc. Like, no, that's good. That's good. You want to spend months tinkering with something that doesn't work and will arguably never work because you just didn't understand whether or not it was fun or not. You just think it is. So you're going to build it up and spend years doing it. And like, no, you want to put it out there and you want to get the feedback. Yes, it sucks that when you're dealing with our particular market, they tend to be a bit volatile and rough at times, right? You're going to get a lot of like, this sucks. Go kill yourself. There's going to be people like that, but those people are always there and we don't care, right? We don't care about that. All we care about are the 10 people who are like, yeah, I kind of had fun with this. Hey, why? What did you like about it? What was interesting? Please tell me, right? Talk to those 10 people and then build your prototype up from there. But yeah, side tangent. Yeah, I see a lot of advice, especially between like developer to developer, to be like, oh, share your game, but only with developers. Never put it out publicly because they're just going to like dump all over you. And it's like, well, yes, that is what happens. But what do we all do to like AAA developers when they unleash a trailer? The entire industry and all the gamers just dump on. They nitpick every little pixel on the trailers and are like, this isn't gameplay and blah 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 blah. It, like, they don't care. Business knows it doesn't matter. What matters is, what were they excited for? Oh, okay, you know what? Sonic was bad. We're gonna like correct that. We're gonna make it into a new Sonic. But all the stuff that people said they liked about the trailer, we just amped that up by 10, and now Sonic is like huge. If you remember that like hate cycle with Sonic the Hedgehog, right?
Yeah, that was pretty extreme.
It was pretty extreme, right? But it's not about the negativity, it's about the positivity. Like, what is positive? If you put it out there and there's like one person who's like, yeah, I kind of like that, that's not great. If you get a handful of people, that's a good sign, right? So you know what to tinker with, you know what to focus on. If you get hundreds of people who are like, yeah, I liked how this dynamic worked, Great. That's perfect. That's what you're looking for. But you're never going to get that information from another developer, first of all, because does that developer understand the process of how you are developing the games? Let's just say we are building this game. Not, let's say we are following a very specific way to do this game. If we showed this prototype to another developer, are they going to understand how and why we are approaching things the way they are? Are they going to come back and be like, this is dumb. Why didn't you build like a demo and show me the demo? Well, we're not
I feel
building a
like this is
vertical
going to
slice.
be a whole episode on its own when we get to the prototype stuff too, because one of the things that pops into my mind is like, because I've done content creation for years and years, and in the early stages I used to get, like make a video and then send it out to friends or post it somewhere asking for feedback, but I stopped doing that because I would ask for feedback and I would never get back anything that was helpful, or I would get feedback back in ways that in the moment back then I felt was wrong because it wasn't the kind of feedback I was looking for. And I'm not saying like I was looking for people to tell me it was great, but it's that I would ask for feedback on specific things because there were certain things I was trying to work on, but I would always get stuff back from in other places. And I feel like that's also something that is an exact parallel of what people experience with prototyping. And when you send that out for
Totally.
feedback, where we're going to look for specific feedback on one thing, but most of the stuff we get back is on other areas, and it feels like there's an art and a science behind how to present asking for feedback as well, and then like things that we should do or not do, and then even just like dissecting what you get back so you can actually grab the nuggets of wisdom out of the things at first that just seem like this is garbage, like this isn't helpful at all.
I mean, you want good feedback? Find somebody who's in QA because they understand a lot of the back end systems as to why things work the way they are, right? And I don't mean play testing because they're the guys who are playing like demos, vertical slice builds. I mean QA, the people who go through to make sure things are being done correctly, analysts, things like that. Ask them for feedback because they'll be able to look at it and tell you what mechanically is like design wise. They have the terminology. Another good one is marketing people. Go to somebody who is in a marketing position that you know, ideally, or reach out and build rapport with people in that field, and then ask them to play your game because their whole role revolves around community engagement and selling. They're looking for the stuff to talk about to get people invested and motivated into joining a community and selling your product. That's literally what like their department is designed to do. So if you give a prototype to somebody in marketing and they're like, yeah, I really like this part, and this part is cool, like you know that they're liking it, and that's like what they're thinking about subconsciously is things around that. Like, how would I sell this? Why would this be good? And you can ask them that. Be like, what stands out to you as a product, as a game to play? Is there anything in here that like catches your eye? Because if there is, like those people will be able to find ways of promoting that, find ways of like talking to a community. They're thinking about a market and thinking about how does it fit there. If you give it to a marketer and they're like, there was nothing good, dude, it was bad. Like, you know, you're bad. So like, I like that. I forget who told me that. That was years ago, but it's so true. Like some of the best feedback I've ever gotten has been from marketing leads where I'm just like, hey, can you do like approach this like you're validating a product to sell? Go. And they're like, oh yeah, this, and like, don't do this is bad. And have you thought about this? The hard part there, just as a caveat, they will add extra stuff to upsell what you have. You don't care about that. You don't want that input. You're just looking for what do they like out of what you have, right? So learn how to take positive feedback everywhere. But you did touch on content creation, and so I think what is a really good example of how what we are doing now fits in content creation. Instead of sending a video out, you're just sending the audio track and you're asking for people, how does this sound? Did you listen to the whole track? Is there any part that you were like, hey, that's interesting? Or like, man, I wish I could see the screen. That's what we're doing is we're giving you just a sample, just a piece, not all of the big picture. It's just enough that has the most important content. And that's what we want feedback on. Because if your audio is bad, if I can't listen to your 10-minute video and be somewhat invested, it doesn't matter what you put in the video, I'm not going to like the video, right? That's how we got to think about it. But if you can send somebody an audio track and they're like, yeah, that's interesting, or like, what were you doing? Or like they have follow up questions, right? Or they liked it, nothing was bad. That's a good sign. That means that the way you produce audio content, right, your scripts, etc., the way that works is good. It's solid. That's the most fundamental level of a YouTube, right? Everybody thinks it's the visuals. It's not. It's the audio. 90% of the videos I watch, I don't even watch. They're just playing and I'm listening to it while I'm working or doing something else, right? Like that's the way it goes. But yeah, audio is, if you can get your audio good, then you can start playing with the visuals and you do the exact same thing. You create a video, take out the audio and send some of the video and be like, do you understand? Do you follow? Like, does this make kind of sense? Right? If they watch it
So
and they're like,
what I'm getting from this is that when I'm sending out feed, or when I'm trying to send something up for feedback, like a prototype, I might end up having multiple different versions of the prototype so that I can get specific feedback on certain things. So if I have a game where I have a character that walks or goes around in a room, it's like a third person shooter, shoots a few different bad guys, and then gets into a car and drives away. I could ask for feedback on the driving and give them the whole game, but there's other aspects at the beginning that might pull their attention or might become the focus. So I would have a version of the prototype where it's got all of it together, but I also the first level and also just the driving, so that way I can kind of like not cater. I can force people, quotation marks there, to focus in on the aspects that I want them to critique and get feedback from.
yes, you can do it that way. The only time you would really need to do that is like when your scope becomes bigger. So like what you described in essence was like GTA mechanics, really, right? Running around, shooting, hopping in a car, driving away. Like in essence, that's the majority of a game like Grand Theft Auto. Those games are big in scope, right? So yeah, you want to make sure driving is good. You want to make sure gunplay is good. You want to make sure character navigation is like moving around the world is good. You want to make sure gunplay is good when you're fighting each other specifically, right? You want to make sure cover systems are good. It is okay to isolate those into small production builds and just test that one mechanic and say like, what can we improve to make this singular experience great? And we do that for every single one. And then when we're done and we start to merge them, we know shooting is great. We know people love driving. Now it's just about getting in the car and getting out of the car and like equipping different weapons and like how does that work and how does that feel? And at that stage you could go into those kinds of prototypes, being like weapon wheels and like create a gun range and just be like, how does it feel to swap weapons? Yeah, that kind of stuff happens for sure on bigger scale productions, but
But
smaller
not
scale,
typically on like an indie scale.
no. Well, no. I mean, the amount of work it takes you to create like a shooting range, creating a driving track, creating all that, like it's a lot, right? But also, it's if you have to do that as a small indie team, your game is too big, right? Like it is. Like if you have to do that with like a 5-person team, you're right at the limit. You're right at the limit of like where it could be feasible, but you probably shouldn't, right? And that's assuming you're all experienced in your relative fields and you are capable of doing it, right, with experience. But like what we're doing, there is no reason why we have to create, a prototype that shows the world shifting to like a trigger. There's no reason for us to create a prototype that shows a branching mechanic. Like all of that could be inside one prototype. That's where we want to be as a small scale team.
That's really cool because that's another a way that I can start to figure like, okay, are we making something bigger than we're capable of doing?
Yeah, and starting with the prototype is a good way to do it because, as we've discussed, not a lot of people approach it this way. They approach the prototype as the vertical slice, as the demo. Let's build, like, put all this time with bells and whistles and examples, and it's just too much. It's too much. Simplify, way down, keep it simple, and then you power through quickly, right? Also, it allows your team to more for smaller scale indie teams where you have to wear multiple hats. It helps teach you how to work together. Just because you like each other doesn't mean we work well together. you and I have known each other a long time, but we've never had to work hand in hand on something like, sure, we do in the innovators, but that's different. Like when we're in there trying to like work on a game and like I'm tinkering with a mechanic and you're like, why does this not work anymore? It's because I broke something. Like, you know what I mean? Like it lets you work together and see like, can we actually work together? Can we actually work as a team? Are we functional? We're just trying to build a prototype, let alone something that we're super passionate about. Because if we could figure that part out, yeah, the passionate part would be easy. Well, easier. Anyways, carrying on here. Our next tab we have in our document here is audio design principles. So our bullet points here are placeholder VO, which is, initial voiceovers for testing, pacing, and logic. That's basically going to be us reading a line and putting it in the engine and be like, yeah, this is how long it takes, right? Distinct character voices. So we're gonna want clear vocal differentiation between the narrator and the child. Like we can't just have like a dude and a younger sounding dude. Like we should really have like something that sounds like an older parent and like an obviously young child, right? It has to be distinct because there's going to be elements, I'm guessing, where they're going to overlap because kids don't wait for you to finish speaking. They just start talking over you a lot of times. And even if you try to speak to them, they just keep going. That's very common. And I think that's going to be an important thing to mix
Yeah,
in
like what I
here.
do to you in the podcast sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, right. And I think our voices are distinct enough that they don't blend or blur for the podcast, which is great. And that's what we're aiming for here. But we should make sure that we say that. And adaptive soundtrack, like music and sound effects that shift and change in response to the world transformations and narrative events. This is something I don't think we've ever talked about, but it's going to be hand in hand with the environment design. And I kind of touched on it earlier with my example about the castle and the dragon, and then it bursts open and it's a piggy and it's a barn and everything's like la la happy land. Like that is a transition in audio. And to do that effectively, you got to beat match, you got to tone, you have to make that transition, right, from dark and gloomy to happy. And it can't just be, you know dark music, but and now we're happy. Like it can't be like that. It has to feel good. And so this is going to be a very important element in our prototype, is seeing if we can make that adaptive change in music feel good, which is why I've included it here. Our next category here is technical considerations, right? So this is thinking about the narrative scripting system. It's the robust system to manage dialogue, triggers, and branching narratives. Like how does that all actually integrate and do things that it's supposed to do? Real-time asset swapping and manipulation. So we need some form of technology, right? And by technology, I just mean like system mechanic to handle the immediate visual changes of the game world. We've touched on that in previous episodes or in just discussions we've had of maybe it's like a cardboard cutout or like a paper cutout, right, with that kind of art style, and then it like folds down and pops up. Maybe it's a transformation. Maybe it's literally a model swap. Maybe we do a particle effect. But that system is what we got to figure out here. That's going to be very important for the prototype. And then VO integration, our voiceover is like we need seamless integration of the voiceover audio with the narrative events. When we hit a trigger, when and how does that audio play? And does that feel good? It's not going to pop on the speakers. It's not going to be like a weird delayed effect. It's going to be timed well with the world transformation. And what does that look like with the integration? Do we want the voiceover to happen first, and mid voiceover, do we want the transformation to start, or do we want the transformation to start the moment the voiceover happens? Like those are things to decide in the prototype, because that's going to affect the feel for the rest of the game. Every level is going to have this same voiceover implementation, right? So it's pretty core. It's a core element, is what I'm getting at. And then our final tab here that I have is future development. So this is targeting MVP in terms of minimal viable product. So our vertical slice, our demo. This is the stuff that we're not putting in the prototype, but our prototype should serve as a foundation for in the future. That's multiple narrative paths. Whatever we're building for the prototype should be able to support that when we go to scale up. We should be able to support more complex child interactions and motivations. So what that means is we don't just want to have the entire game be a volume-based trigger in Unity or Unreal that triggers every single dialogue. Like that's not going to be fun to explore as a player. It's not in theme of like a childlike wonder, right? Like it's off brand. So we need to figure out ways of being like, yeah, sometimes it's volume based. Sometimes it's going to have to pick up objects. Sometimes could we work in the system of I have to pick up an object, and if I take it to another object, maybe it's looking at. Maybe we come up with a system where we look at the big scary tree, and if we look at it at a certain angle or we look at it long enough, it triggers a narrative response, right? Like there's more complex ways we can approach this in the future, but our narrative system has to be able to account for that. This like modularity is what we're planning for.
You mentioned before about how maybe it's not needed, but it feels more important now because if we're not taking some of this into consideration, like being able to make more complex child interactions and motivations, maybe during the prototype, the way that we build it and develop it, it fits really well for just what that is. And then maybe because of that, we don't even take, or because we haven't thought about the future development, we don't take into consideration its limitations. And so then sure, everything works for the prototype, but once we try to expand past that, it's now suddenly a lot more complicated. And there's a lot of things that aren't maybe going to work in the way that they could have.
Yeah, and to be fair, this is a more seasoned or more experienced developer thing to think about is that long-term modularity, especially in like the programming and design side of things. But we do want to be aware of that, of like, are we building this in the prototype in a way that requires us to refactor, which means like rebuild, right? Do we want to refactor every single time we want to implement something? No, no, that's bad. That's bad. Like we hate that. We hate refactoring. Refactoring is the devil. So like, no. But it takes being mindful about it, being like, okay, is the way I'm programming this dynamic? Can we just have a function that causes a result and we can call that function from anything? That's a good setup because it doesn't matter what happens, right? We're just calling the narrative function. Or are we programming this in a way where it's like when character hits this box, do this, like hard coding style, right? Hard coding is really difficult to plan for long term, especially if you never cut that out in like a prototype stage. Because what that implies is that you're going to hard code every single interaction. That becomes a nightmare to debug. It becomes a nightmare to sort through. It becomes a nightmare when you change something down the line and like a different element breaks. Like and an example of this is when you see a dev log from a company and they're like, yeah, we put out this patch. And then all of a sudden, like all the guns break. And it's like, well, why would they do that? They know like the systems. Well, no, it's probably because somewhere in the thousands of lines of code, something was hard coded because there was no anticipation that it would change in the future. And when it changed in the future, it messed up everything after that. So every additional update and that relied on that hard coded information is now going to break. It makes patching incredibly difficult. It makes long term support on video games incredibly difficult. If you think about the games that have been out for like a year or two, like 1.0 release, and they still have tons of bugs. This is why that typically happens. It's why you see in some games like 7 Days to Die, they change a system and like half the stuff breaks, or they have to disable stuff. They're like, yes, in the code, sure, there are ways to interact with an object, but you can't do it in the game. Why? Probably because something in there is hard coded for a certain result and it causes an error. And rather than hold up a whole patch or a content release for months while we figure it out, we're just going to disable this piece. You can have the rest of this to play with. We're going to figure this out because we need more time, right? Like that's the hidden side of things that gamers don't see, but that's why they happen. It's not the only reason it happens, but it is a very common one. Is typically things are hard coded. They're not like designed with modularity in mind or the use case that it could be expanded on in the future. And so it's built that way. Why things are hard coded often comes from when a designer doesn't account for those changes. And so they don't design a system that can be like tinkered with. And so the programmer is another layer where they're like, oh, well, I don't have to tinker with this. I'm never going to have to revisit this once it's approved. I'm going to build it because it's fast, it's quick, it's efficient, it's done. None of those situations, like the roles, like that would pass through like designer to programmer to artist to QA to testing to live to bug testing to live ops. Like all those departments, not one of them did anything wrong, right? This is the other caveat here. None of them did anything wrong. They all did their jobs. They all did everything that was required. It was just simply a matter of, like circumstance that led to a situation where that very first design step didn't account for it. And now it has massive repercussions. And the longer a game is on the market for, or in development for even, the bigger those repercussions are going to be. So I don't say any of this to scare people. It's just to be aware that when you are designing, are you designing something modular? And not just design, but when you're creating it, right? Like even as a coder, whatever. When you're designing it, is it modular or is it like bespoke? Is it like hard coded? If this, then that. Neither is wrong, but just understand the limitations. If this, then that is literally that. Like that's it. That's where you can take it. There's not a lot that you can expand on without a lot of janky stuff in the future. If you're making something modular where you're like, here's a function and it's callable and this is a result that's going to happen. Here's the data it spits out. Now we are going to code in a different object to read the data and have a different result. That's modular because you can create a second object that reads the data and has a different result, right? Like a win-loss condition, things like that, right? So getting in the habit of doing everything as modular as you can will save you in the long run. But is it required? We could hard code this entire game. I wouldn't recommend it, but we could, and it could work and it would be fine because luckily for us, there's a finite amount of branching that we would do. We're not going to come back and revisit an interaction system like 5 levels in and change how it's going to work. One, because we're planning for it now. We're aware of it now, but also the nature of the game we're making. We never really have to account for extreme situations. So the modularity isn't as intense for us, is what I'm getting at. Like that requirement for it.
That makes sense.
Cool.
I don't know enough about that stuff to be able to have any sort of input to be helpful, but except to be like, yeah, okay.
Well, as long as you follow along, it seems pretty clear. I think everybody who's following along, hopefully, will be in a similar boat. They're like, okay, that makes sense.
Well, if not, send some messages, yell at James. That's fine.
Yeah,
send us audio recordings of you being really mad, and I'll pass them over to James. I don't mind.
We could do it live. Reasons James sucks. So next is expanded environments and levels. We kind of touched about this like during my rant, thinking about where things are going to go, where that kind of becomes important. And I use the word expanded is because our prototype is going to serve as a tutorial. That's how I'm thinking about it, right? All of our interactions, all the introduction to the dialogue, it's basically going to set the grounds for the tutorial. In a more fleshed out development process, when we're in the midst of it and we're working on a level, it's probably going to be more in depth than just like 1 or 2 interactions and a couple branching narrative, right? It's probably going to be.
So what do you mean by sets it for the tutorial?
Well, it's a story, right? Like, and I'm referencing our past conversations here about the character is walking into like a field and there's a well and there's like a coin on the ground and then there's like a couple paths, right? There's something that I've mentioned anyways a few times. So if I keep that in mind, that's a really good tutorial element to teach people how this game could work, right? How it works with the dialogue of, we have little sparkles coming up off the coin. And when you come up and you look at it, there's an interaction prop. And when you pick it up and it's like instinctively, there's a well, I'm going to go over there and see what happens, right? Like it allows the player to go down a certain path instead, maybe. And maybe we have a small bit of dialogue being like, oh, but the other way is so much more interesting. I think that she
What does that have to do with the tutorial, though? Or is it just like setting up for it?
The tutorial serves 2 purposes in a game. One is to set expectations. The other is to teach the player how to play. Now, in our case, teaching the player how to play is navigation and an interaction prompt. Like those are the only two inputs that we really need for this entire game. Like I want to pick up an object, maybe. I want to click interact on a button and it pushes in and has a result. Maybe. That's it. The rest of it is movement, right? But we still need to tell the player that, like, hey, you walking around the world is going to have an impact on how this plays out. So in our narrative is we're going to want to have when the player goes down a branching path, either path, it doesn't matter, we should have a moment of a voiceover that says, "Oh, but what about the other way?" and blah 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 blah. And if the player continues, we just cut in a dialogue where like the children's, but I think this way is going to be more fun, right? And then like there's ways of telling the player, "Hey, there's another option," and then we leave it up to the player to figure it out. If we have the sparkles coming up from the coin, it's a visual eye catch, and we're relying on the player to realize I can pick this coin up. And because we
That's a
have a
really
well,
interesting. What?
yeah,
Sorry.
so we're teaching the
It's like,
player without being like,
yeah.
here's a tool tip, do this, and here's the option. This is branching narrative, right?
Because the all of the tutorials that I can think of that I've enjoyed or didn't realize they were tutorials were ones that also did the other aspect you were talking about, where it set me up for like the expectations of the game
Yeah.
versus the tutorial. Like I hate launching up a game and then the tutorial it locks me into forcing me to just do these different mechanics and it's not actually relevant or important to anything that's going on. So there's no aspect of it there that's like giving me expectations of what or setting up expectations of the game in that. That's a really cool way that you put it there.
Well, it's just a good way to design a tutorial is you make the tutorial part of the game, right? But without context, it's really hard to do that. So that's what I have for expanded environments. That's why I termed it that way, is because our initial prototype is just the testing ground. And a lot of people like here's the other part I haven't talked about is the prototype is literally the testing ground. It is. That's like we're
It's not
testing
the
the
first
mechanics.
level.
It is,
It
right?
could
It's the
be, but
first.
it could be, but it's not. It's not like this is going to be the first level of our game. This
Yeah,
is this is
it's
the
the
we're testing
first.
it out.
Yeah, specifically, it's the first point of interaction with our game. So that doesn't have to be the first level, but it's our first, a player's first exposure to our game. And if that again isn't fun to experience, then our tutorial is going to be. This is what I'm getting at, right? So if you find
Okay.
a way to incorporate the tutorial as part of the prototype, you're in a good position. Like if to play your tutorial is fun, that's great. We just need to make this look pretty. And there's our first level or the very opening scene for our game. And it's our prototype level, right? Because I'm guiding it along that path, but that's why I'm doing it.
I struggle when I hear it's the first interaction of the player or that the player has with the game. And it gives me when I first hear that, it makes me think that it's supposed to be like it's like this is the first thing that our players will have with the game. As in like that's the start of the game, it's where it all begins. So when I hear that, it makes me feel like it has to be the actual tutorial, like whatever the tutorial level or whatever the very first level of our game is going to be, that's what the prototype is supposed to be designed for. But then we also hear that it's like it's the testing for it. So it feels like two separate things.
I think that's because it's the presentation of tutorials in games that you're familiar with, right? I think
Okay.
that's why. Is because, like you said, a lot of games will force you into an environment or take you out of the game with like a menu. Sometimes it's like a little video tooltip of like how an ability works, and you got to read through it and press the X or circle button to close the window, right? That's often what people think about when they think about tutorial. But the essence of a tutorial is to teach somebody something, right? It doesn't have to be that. It could be any kind of presentation so long as whoever is going through it learns what they're supposed to learn or at least understands the basics of what they're supposed to be doing.
So the prototype, when we say that it's the first interaction with the player, that doesn't mean that when the player buys the game and the game's finished, that their first interaction with playing the game isn't this first interaction that we're talking about. These are two separate first interactions. So this is
Yes, yes, and no, right? So the tutorial is not the game. That's why I want to stress here. The tutorial is not the game. The tutorial is the process of teaching the player how to play a game. Because there's multiple tutorials. The moment we introduce a new mechanic, we're going to want to create a new tutorial that fits that mechanic whenever it shows up in the game in the future. Like lots of games do that, where you're just running along, you unlocked a new ability, and it's like, press R1 to use ability, and click. That's a tutorial, right? If you're playing something like Helldivers and it's like, here's boot camp, and it's just like super in your face, this is a tutorial, that's a tutorial, right? But that's the first level in Helldivers, as you go through a boot camp and it teaches you all the basic mechanics and is like, good luck out there, right? What's great about making the prototype, or sorry, your tutorial as part of the game, are situations like, well, I can leave the boot camp, I'm gonna run over into the desert, and then the game's like, you're a deserter, and then it's like starts shooting you in the training ground, and you die, and you're like, whoa, that's intense. But that's what it's like in the game when you go to the
Well, so
real maps, right?
where I'm getting confused with this is like, if let's say our video game that we're making here was intended to start out where it's linear for the first 2 levels, and then we get to a moment where it branches off, and then that's when it starts to have more of the interactive stuff that we've discussed with the game. So if that's the case, then I would want to build the prototype around that moment later on in the game, where we would want to build the level for all those. So that's why I get confused about the first point of contact for the player, because when I hear first contact, it makes me think that the prototype is still supposed to be the very beginning when it's linear, when really our prototype, we would want to build it around the stuff that happens like 3 levels in, where we know it's going to start. Like that's where the actual branching mechanics start to come in, or like the interactive mechanics start to come in. Like this is just like
Okay, just
yeah.
hypothetically, with your response, why are we waiting 3 whole levels to start to show the interaction mechanics? Like that doesn't make sense, right?
Well, so
Because the context,
okay.
remember, the context for what we are doing, and it always depends on context. The context of what we are doing is a dynamic branching narrative. It like the very bare
Correct.
bones, right? How do we explain that to the player? The
By
best, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say by having that be a part of the game from the beginning.
Exactly. So what's the first point of contact in terms of prototype that we have with the player in the game world? It's navigation. It's them
Mm-hmm.
moving around the world. We can imply that there's something special about a coin with a visual effect. And if the player mouses over it, we could be like, hey, press E to pick up.
Well,
That's
I
super
still
simple,
think we're
right?
looking at the term of point of contact with the player as 2 different things. That's where I'm
Well,
struggling
it's
right
point of
now.
contact with the game, right? So like if you take it to be a literal sense, the first point of contact is pressing start game
Yeah.
or new game, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about the experience that we are trying to provide as a video game. What is the first point of contact with that experience? Now, some games will force you into a tutorial level, like military games
Okay.
are famous
No,
for
I
this,
understand all that
right?
stuff. It was just the
It's
with the way that you said it there, it makes sense now for the first point of contact. Because when I first heard first point of contact, it meant like when I open up the game and hit start, that's the first point of contact. That's what the prototype's supposed to be. But
okay. Yeah.
yeah, that's when I heard first point of contact, that's I was just wanted to clarify with that.
No, that's a good question to like go back and forth. But yeah, I am specifically referring to the experience of what the game is supposed to be providing, right? Like, what is the experience of this game? I'm not talking shell menus. I'm not talking about the executable. I'm not talking about the storefront. I'm not talking about the first initial game menu. Those are all things that exist outside of the game, right? Is how I'm thinking about it. So, uh, for like a visual way to think about this is like you consider a book, the hardcover with like the title and the key art on front. Yes, that can imply certain things about the book, the story that's going to happen. Maybe it's a cool piece of a dragon. You're like, oh, what's this book about? Right? Like, sure, it is implying something about the game. But that's not the story. You don't look at the cover of a book and be like, oh, this is the story that I'm going to experience. It's just you're implying, right? Your first
So then,
actual
with the
interaction with the
context of the
novel
book,
is the pages.
the
I'm just going to run with this for a second.
okay,
Give
yeah,
me
yeah,
a second.
go for it,
Right?
yeah.
Is when you start to read it. Chapter 1, first sentence is your first engagement with the actual part of a book, right? So think about that in terms of game development, where all the shell menus, the main menu, options, start game, all of that is just the cover that envelopes, that like holds your book together. That's not your first point of contact with players, right? That's just your players going through a menu system. It's no different than going to the file button in Windows. It's not actually them playing the game. Our prototype is not about that. Our prototype is about they're inside the first level that loads. From that point on, to show our basic level, like our basic mechanics that we've outlined here in our game premise. And how do we get the player to go through all these things we've identified, our core mechanics, our story arcs, our like who the characters are, environment design principles. The tutorial should encompass all of that in the prototype. My argument, and I think this is where I kind of lost you there, is your tutorial should be able to cover all of that stuff. And if it doesn't, it's a bad tutorial. Is what I'm getting.
Okay. Because where I was coming from with it is because like some books and some games they'll have there's chapter 1, but they also have a chapter that comes before chapter 1 where it's got something different, something weird, something arguably like Death Stranding. It's the very first part of the game isn't, I mean, it's got some of the very like the very basic elements of the game, but it doesn't have some of like the moving around and making choices of like where you're going and how you're moving around stuff. It's just walking to a place to get to a cave, and then a cutscene starts. And so like that's art. Arguably, that's first contact for the player, but it's not first contact with the core of what the player will experience.
What do you mostly do in Death Stranding?
You just walk around.
To a destination.
Yeah.
So how is that not the core essence of the game?
But if we were to build a prototype for Death Stranding, it wouldn't just be walk to the cave, would it?
Why not?
Like, I feel like.
So this is the thing. I think you're overthinking it, right? The whole purpose
Okay.
of all of this is to simplify. What's the most basic mechanic for Death Stranding? Well, it's not just navigation. It's navigation in this reality, right?
So maybe I'm still thinking of prototypes at times as more complicated than
I think you're
than they need
thinking
to
of
be.
it as an MVP, like a minimal viable product is what I think you're thinking about it still.
I think because I know there's part of me that still doesn't like the idea of saying that it has to be the start of the game. I don't know. I
Well,
don't know
it doesn't
why.
have to be, right? Maybe my word choice is bad here. It's not that it has to be the start of the game. It just, that's the most reasonable time to do it, right? We're not, and in many games, not just our case, uh, it's not a good idea to just let the player loose into the setting anywhere without some form of context of what to do or how to do things, right? Those are the biggest complaints. And the games that do that are not easy to play. Like, I don't care that Minecraft is the biggest game on the planet. I don't care that everybody loves it and everything else. If you took somebody today who's never heard of Minecraft, you put them in that game without access to the internet or people at large, just in a room, play this game. They're going to be like, what the fuck?
Yeah, even at the
Sorry,
beginning when it first
excuse me.
launched.
When you first launch, yeah, you're going to be like, I don't know what's going on. And sure, you can walk around and like, okay, I can kind of hit, and I'm just gonna like button mash stuff and see what happens. And that is not good game design. It's not. And it's not a good experience either. If you take somebody who's never played a game before and you put them in Minecraft and you're like, go, they're going to be like, what do I do? And sure, you can run around. You're like, okay, nighttime's bad, but like, I don't realize I can pick up stuff. I don't know how inventory works. I'm going to like hit the inventory button. How come my inventory isn't opening? Because it's not the inventory button. It's the E button. Like, what game has E on inventory, right? The only reason it's so successful is because it was a sandbox environment that had a dedicated following that just slowly built it up, so that now today I don't really need to know how to experiment. I can just go on YouTube or be exposed to Minecraft material, and I'm being told by the community how to play and how to enjoy and engage with the game. And as I learn the basics, I'm going to go look up builds. I'm going to go look up what an observer is. What the heck does this thing do? Is there a recipe for this? 90% of the people that I know who are new to it, and myself included, because I didn't grow up with Minecraft, right? We go online to figure out what blocks do, where to get them, or what they're from, or what
I
mod
grew up
pack.
with Minecraft, and I still did that when the game first came out.
Yeah, right. So my point is that was a game that is successful because it was reliant on a community that built it up, right? The but as a game by itself, as a tutorial, as for like figuring out what to do, no, it sucks. It's bad. It's bad because it doesn't do that. I'm not saying it's a bad game. That's not what I'm saying. It's a great sandbox. But I think the people who use that as a reference to build a game get that confused. Minecraft is a sandbox environment where you can go and express creativity. It's not actually a game per se, it's more of an experience. You can't use that as a milestone or a target or a representation when you're trying to build a game. And we see tons of games who do that, where they try to create a more creative sandbox style environment, but it's centered around game elements, and it doesn't work. Well, of course it doesn't work because it doesn't even work for Minecraft. It's just that Minecraft is like first to market to have this incredible sandbox place, like environment for people to go and tinker and explore. And like it's totally not how games work. It's not how games should be made today. So it's confusing.
So then, for what I understand now is, if I'm trying to build a prototype and the prototype can't exist at the beginning of the game because it's got other mechanics that are being added in later, then that's not actually the prototype for the game, because it's not the game at its core features. And so the reason why the game exists at that very first point is because at the very first point when a player starts playing the game, that's before they have all of the that's got the very basics of the game. It's before they've learned these extra new mechanics that come in later on to overcome other obstacles. It's just, if it's ever in its most simplest, purest form, it is at that first point before you've learned before all of the other extra features and mechanics get added in as you progress. And so that's why.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
I understand now.
Okay, cool. Well, it's tough, right? But like, is it fair for me to assume that a lot of the confusion has come from your understanding of other games?
uh yeah, I think it was a mix of that and just I think I I have a personality that's very defiant. When I'm told something has to be a specific way, I'm like, how dare you? It does not have to be. And so when I heard it has to start at the beginning, part of my mind was just like, are you sure? No, there's got to be another situation. Let's check this out. What about all these other things? And so, yeah, I think that's where that came from.
How dare you? How dare you?
You can't tell me what to do.
Um, yeah. So yeah, expanded environments, right? That's taking what you just described there. It's like later in the game when you're offering more complexity, the stuff we're building in the prototype should it like that complex feature should be a build up of stuff we've already prototyped. It should not be a new standalone where it's like
Unless you're making some like weird artistic thing.
even then, right? Like it really should be a buildup of what you have that makes it complex, not just adding complexity by adding more parts. That's not good.
So Spore breaks everything that we're talking about here right now.
How so?
Because Spore exists, it's like three different games all in one, where it's like you're the amiibo and now you're a city colony management. Oh, and then there's also the walking around in third person eating things to grow bigger, and then it's a space game at the end. Unless they just would have had to make four different prototypes, and then it was kind of treated like four different games all put into one.
Well, the thing there is how you interact with the game is pretty well the same. It's all point and click, WASD, like rotating planets. Like your core experience with the game doesn't really change, even throughout all those different eras, right? What changes are like your objectives and the mechanics upon which you use. But even then, it's still like I need spice and this ship goes and collects spice. It's like a tooltip that comes up, right? So you click the ship and you right click on the food or the spice, which is the same thing as clicking on a creature, a tribesman, and clicking on the food, which is the same thing as clicking on the food when you're just like a single cell organism, right?
Well,
Like
but in
the
the
how,
beginning, what weren't you
like,
moving around with the arrow keys though and stuff like that?
but you can still do that, right? The those interactions don't change, is what I'm getting at. It's only the presentation, the world design, that how those systems and objectives are changing. You having to go get X resource to satisfy Y requirement doesn't change. It really doesn't. Like you need to eat 4 things of DNA to progress to the next stage. You need to produce 6 offspring to reach the next stage. You need to conquer all the tribesmen. You get where I'm going with this, right? Like
Yeah, to
the
a degree.
presentation, yeah, of that the player has objectives about maintaining this organism in order to advance that organism to the next stage. That is the core essence of the game, right? The presentation of the game changes. Yes, the environment changes. We go from like a 2D plane to like a bigger 2D plane to like a forest to a continent to the whole planet to the solar system. Like yes, those expand and yes, they do get more complicated, but there's also a tutorial at the start of every single one of those changes, and it's not a new game for every era, right? It's just a new mechanic, a new prototype, if you will, for every change in the era. But the game as a whole, the design of the game, how the player interacts, how the options available to the player, more or less, that all stays the same. So the reason why Spore is good is that when you reach civilization stage, now you get to custom build buildings, or sorry, tribes, right? When you reach the tribal stage, you can create stuff for your tribesmen to wear, and you can create huts, and you design them however you want. And when you advance to the next stage, you get that same mechanic is built on, and now you get to build cities. And then you get to build army things like military units and airships and water boats. And then you get to build spaceships. But all of that is built up off of the basic mechanic, which is I'm going to take an object and slap it to this object, and it is now a component. Does it matter that what I am building is a procedurally walking spider, or that it is a great big tank that rolls on the ground, or that it is a spaceship, or that it is a building? No, it doesn't, because the core technology, the core prototype of Spore was the idea of procedurally combining things to make whatever you want. The reason to do that is like the environment design, which is like you're a cell, you're an organism. You're growing to become like fourth stage civilization or whatever, whatnot, right? Like that is the actual presentation of the game, but your fundamental prototype was always there from the beginning.
So the
When you
reason why it
first build
felt
a
so
cell,
disconnected because of how visually different each of the stages were, but really the core of the game was still there in each of the stages. I can see that now.
okay, yeah. And to prove my point, was there ever a point while you were playing Spore where you made a transition to a new era where you were just like, I'm done. Like this is bad. I don't like this game. This is,
Well, yes, the
well,
space
a
because it.
little bit. Yeah, the space wasn't great. I'm not gonna lie. The space
Yeah.
part wasn't great, but the rest of it, it all felt in line up until space, right? It all felt cohesive. It all made sense, right? Because it was all built off of the same thing. Where it was bad was space because it did not align with a lot of the stuff that was already pre-built, and that's the complexity part that I was talking about earlier. When you just add stuff to the mix where it's a new starting point, but it doesn't build up off of anything, that's not modular and it doesn't work well with your design. Players have a preconceived perception of what the game is and how it's going to play. And this just comes out of nowhere. Like, oh, I guess I'm an auto battler now. Like, that doesn't work. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. But yeah, and it's also tough too, because everything I'm talking about, like, I'm a newer generation, not newer, but on the younger side of the development life cycle of
Which
games
feels
on an
crazy to hear
industry.
because we are We're in our 30s.
Yeah, like we're not the newest gen, but we're on the newer side, the newer half, if you will, of the game industry. Now, all the games that we grew up with were the games where they were really doing a lot of this stuff for the first time. Everything that we're building now are just built up on what was proven by those first and second generation developers, really, when you think about it. So, like everything we're talking about now, like Spore was the first of its kind concept. Did people necessarily know in the industry back then not to just like slap in this new chunk of things that kind of are in line in concept, but not like in mechanics and framework? Probably not. Like people probably tinkered, but there was no real evidence to support that that's probably bad or that it would feel bad as a player who's playing that game. They didn't really have playtesters in a lot of cases back then. They did, but they didn't. Like it wasn't like today, right? Like the feedback wasn't there today. You can go on the internet now and with a couple clever searches, you can search up 40 years worth of feedback on EA games. Not quite 40, I forget how long they've been around. Well, my point is, like, that's the level of feedback and information you and I and anybody younger than us have access to that everybody older than us didn't. So when you reference games, we can't hold them to like, this is how it should be done. No, it's just that's what they did in their time. So while it is a good blueprint for stuff that worked really well, it doesn't mean that's the way it has to be. It doesn't mean that's the way it should be either. So, anyways, it's interesting to balance that.
So we've gone through a lot here, and we still have a lot more to go through. I think this is a great spot for us to come back next episode so that we can give the next section the proper time it deserves. Because
I suppose
I feel that if we were to keep going right now, we could be still like this episode could end up being 4, maybe 5 hours long. Because I have lots of questions for the next section, which sucks because I was really excited to talk about the actual development plan part because like this is all really, really important. And again, it's something that I feel now that we've gone through it, someone could skip it. It doesn't have to be done, but there's so much important context here that goes into the actual development plan that I don't think we would be able to. The development plan wouldn't be as strong, and or even just like the basic understanding of it wouldn't be as strong without this, because this, like, we've gone through a whole bunch of brainstorming and a bunch of planning. We've gone through so much of that, and we've worked on all of these important details. But now to come in for the narrative game development plan that we have here, we needed to take all of that and we needed to pull out and isolate the important defining parts of each of those so that our development plan doesn't get overloaded and overrun with all this extra information that doesn't need to be there. And so that's why I feel like this was so incredibly important, which I thought it was going to be like, okay, yeah, cool. All right. It's something that needed to be done. But no, I didn't realize now that we've gone through it. Like it took about halfway before I was like, okay, yes, I now understand the incredibly important part of like how this is going to influence our development plan.
So, cool. Okay. I mean, like, I'm good with that. I think.
Really, all I'm trying to do is stress is that sure, it makes sense that it doesn't have to be done, but yeah, I think it's gonna be important from everything that I've read so far about the development plan.